The statue stood alone on the empty plains of the planet Solara. Wind swept across the tall blue grass that reached up to touch the statue's feet. For 1,000 years, the stone woman had watched the 3 moons rise and fall. Her face looked almost real, as if she might turn and speak at any moment. Her hands were held out, palms up, like she was waiting to receive something. Strange marks covered her skin, looking like tiny stars and swirls carved into the stone. The statue was not made of normal rock. It shone slightly when the twin suns hit it just right. It was the color of milk with hints of blue light that seemed to move inside it. No one knew what it was made of. When scientists tried to take small samples, their tools could not cut it. When they scanned it, their machines showed nothing but static. Jiwoo stood before the statue, writing notes on her tablet. This was her first time seeing it in person after studying pictures of it for 5 years. The real thing was much more striking than any image had shown. Jiwoo worked for the Earth Science team, the 4th group to study the statue this year alone. "It's getting dark, Jiwoo. We should set up camp," called Do-yeon, the team leader. He was already putting together the shelter that would protect them from the cold night winds. "Just 5 more minutes," Jiwoo said, not taking her eyes off the statue. There was something about the face that seemed sad, like someone who had been waiting too long for a friend who never came. This world had been empty for over 1,000 years. The people who had lived here, called the Luminar by historians, had vanished without a trace. They left behind only a few buildings, some strange tools, and this statue. No bodies were ever found. No signs of war or disease. They had simply disappeared. The statue was the best preserved thing on the planet. Other teams had been coming here for 200 years, trying to solve the mystery. Some thought the statue was just art. Others believed it was a monument to a leader. A few thought it might be a god the Luminar had worshipped. Jiwoo had a different idea. She believed the statue was a message. The patterns on its skin were too precise, too regular to be just decoration. The way it stood in the exact center of what was once the largest city on the planet seemed important. "The ground around it is different," Jiwoo said as Do-yeon walked up beside her. She pointed to the dirt at the base of the statue. "See how it forms circles." Do-yeon nodded. Other teams have noticed that. They think it's just from thousands of visitors walking around it in the same path. "No," Jiwoo said firmly. "Look closer. The patterns start right at the base and move outward. People would walk in a circle at a comfortable distance, not right against it." She knelt down and brushed some dirt away with her hand. Underneath was a smooth stone surface with more of the strange markings. "I think these are words," she said quietly. "We've tried to translate the Luminar language for centuries," Do-yeon reminded her. "No one has succeeded." "Because we're missing something," Jiwoo insisted. She stood up and pulled out her light. The sun had nearly set, and the statue's face was now in shadow. She shined the light upward, illuminating the woman's serene expression. That night, Jiwoo couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the statue standing alone in the darkness. Had it really been there for 1,000 years without moving? What was its purpose? Why make something so lifelike just to leave it standing in an empty city? The next morning, she was up before sunrise. Without telling the others, she went back to the statue. The first rays of light were just touching the top of its head, making the stone glow slightly blue. Jiwoo set up her equipment and began to scan the ground around the statue. The other teams had focused on the statue itself, but she believed the answer lay in the patterns beneath it. As her scanner moved slowly over the ground, it revealed more and more of the circular markings. By midday, Do-yeon and the rest of the team had joined her. They watched as her computer put together all the scans into one big picture. "It's a spiral," Yubin, their language expert, said with wonder in her voice. "The markings start at the statue and spiral outward for at least 50 meters. And look at how they change." Jiwoo pointed to her screen. "Near the statue, the symbols are small and simple. As they move outward, they get more complex. Like a story, Yubin whispered, starting simple and building to something bigger. For the next week, the team worked day and night. They uncovered more of the spiral pattern and took thousands of pictures. Juwu became convinced that the spiral was a key to understanding who the Luminar were and why they disappeared. On the 8th day, as the team was packing up to leave, Juwu stood alone before the statue one last time. The evening light made the stone woman's face look almost alive. "We'll figure out your secret," Juwu promised quietly. "We'll learn what you're trying to tell us." As she turned to walk away, a small breeze blew across the plains. For just a moment, Juwu thought she heard something like a whisper. She looked back at the statue, but nothing had changed. The stone woman continued her silent watch, waiting for someone to speak her name. 3 months had passed since Juwu's team discovered the spiral patterns around the statue on Silora. Their findings had caused excitement across the scientific community. The Earth Science Group had sent their best language expert to the planet, Minho Kim. Minho was not what people expected when they thought of a famous linguist. He was young, only 32, with messy hair and clothes that never seemed to match. But his mind was sharp. He had learned 23 Earth languages and 7 alien ones. He could see patterns where others saw only random marks. When Minho first arrived on Silora, he walked slowly around the statue, saying nothing for hours. The stone woman stood as she always had, hands open, face calm. Juwu watched him with hope in her eyes. "Well," she finally asked as the day grew late, "what do you think?" Minho touched the base of the statue gently. "This is not just writing," he said quietly. "It's music." Music? Juwu was confused. The Luminar didn't separate writing from sound, Minho explained. Each mark is both a word and a note. The spiral is a song. For weeks, Minho worked day and night. He set up his tent right next to the statue and rarely left it. He compared the marks on the ground to the few pieces of Luminar writing that had been found on other ruins. Slowly, he began to understand. The marks near the statue are simpler because they are the beginning notes, he told Juwu one evening as they sat by the small fire. The song grows more complex as it moves outward, telling a story. "What story?" Juwu asked, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I'm not sure yet," Minho admitted. "But I think it's about the statue herself. I think she has a name." The next day, a storm came to the plains of Silora. The wind howled and rain fell in sheets. Everyone stayed in the main shelter, everyone except Minho. When Juwu noticed he was missing, she put on her rain gear and ran to his tent. It was empty. Through the curtain of rain, she saw him standing in front of the statue. The wild weather didn't seem to bother him. He was walking along the spiral, stopping every few steps to make notes on his waterproof tablet. "Minho," she called, running to him. "What are you doing? You'll get sick." He looked up, his face bright with excitement despite the rain. "The water brings out the colors," he shouted over the storm. "Look." Juwu looked down and gasped. The spiral pattern was glowing faintly blue where the rain hit it. Each symbol shimmered with a different shade, creating a rainbow pattern that had been invisible when dry. The Luminar used water-reactive pigments, Minho explained. "This isn't just a message, it's meant to be read in the rain." After the storm passed, more experts came to the planet. They brought special equipment to spray water on the spiral and record the colors that appeared. Minho worked with them, building a computer program that could translate the colors into sounds. One night, 2 months into his work, Minho called everyone to the statue at midnight. The 3 moons of Silora were all full, lighting up the plains almost as bright as day. "I think I've figured it out," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "The spiral isn't just one message, it's many layers of meaning all together, and at its center is a name." He pressed a button on his computer, and strange sounds filled the air. It was like music, but not quite. The notes seemed to flow into each other, creating patterns that made Juwoo's skin tingle. "This is what the spiral sounds like when translated properly," Minho explained. "And hidden in the music is this." He pressed another button, and a single sound played. It was short but beautiful, like a bird call mixed with the sound of water. "That's her name," he said, pointing to the statue. "At least I think it is." "Can you say it?" asked Juwoo. Minho shook his head. "Not yet. Human voices can't make that exact sound. But I'm working on a way to pronounce something close enough." Days turned into weeks as Minho tried different ways to say the name. He created special tools to help shape the sounds his mouth could make. He practiced for hours each day until his throat was sore. Other experts came and went. Some thought Minho was wasting his time. "It's just a statue," they said. "The Luminar are gone." They'd been gone for 1,000 years. But Minho didn't give up. Something about the statue's face made him certain she was waiting for someone to speak her name. One evening, as the suns were setting, Minho sat alone at the base of the statue. Juwoo watched from a distance as he traced the spiral with his finger, following it from the outside all the way to the center. "I think I can say your name now," she heard him whisper to the statue. "Not perfectly, but close enough, I hope." Minho took a deep breath. He had been practicing this sound for months, reshaping how his tongue and throat worked. He placed his hand on the statue's foot and spoke a word that sounded like Heyun, but with strange tones that rose and fell in ways human languages didn't use. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, so faintly that Juwoo thought she imagined it, the statue seemed to grow warmer. The strange patterns on its skin glowed just a little brighter in the fading light. Minho smiled. "I'm getting closer," he said to the stone woman. "Soon, I'll say your name properly, and we'll find out why you've been waiting all this time." The sun had not yet risen on Solara when Minho woke from a strange dream. In it, he had heard the statue's name spoken clearly, not by his voice but by the wind itself. He sat up in his small tent, his heart beating fast. The dream felt important, like a message. Without waiting for the others to wake, Minho walked to the statue. Morning mist hung low over the ground, making the spiral patterns look like they were floating. The statue stood as it always had, still and silent in the half-light. For 6 months, Minho had tried different ways to say the name he had found in the spiral. Each attempt had produced tiny responses, a slight warming of the stone, a faint glow that faded quickly. But now, after his dream, he felt he understood something new. "The name isn't just sound," he whispered to himself. "It's feeling. It's memory." He placed both hands on the base of the statue and closed his eyes. In his mind, he pictured the spiral pattern, seeing how it flowed from outside to inside like water moving to the center of a pool. The Luminar hadn't just written a name. They had created a path to follow. As the first rays of sunlight touched the top of the statue, Minho began to trace the spiral with his foot, moving slowly from the outer edge toward the center. With each step, he hummed a note that matched the symbol he stood on. The sound was strange, rising and falling in ways that human songs rarely did. When he reached the center, standing directly in front of the statue, he opened his eyes and looked up at her face. The rising sun made the stone glow with a soft blue light. "Heyun," he said, but this time he shaped the sound differently. His voice moved from high to low and back again, like a bird's call. As he spoke, he traced the final symbol on the statue's foot with his finger. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sound like distant bells filled the air. The stone beneath Minho's hand grew warm, then hot. He stepped back quickly. Thin lines of light appeared on the statue's surface, starting at her feet and moving upward. The lines followed the strange patterns that covered her skin, making them glow bright blue. The light grew stronger, forcing Minho to shield his eyes. The noise woke the others in the camp. Juwoo was the first to reach Minho's side, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the ringing sound. "I said her name," Minho answered simply. I said it the way the Luminar would have. The light from the statue was now so bright that it lit up the plains around them like daylight. The stone began to change, becoming transparent in places, like glass or clear water. Inside, they could see something moving. A crack appeared on the statue's face, running from her forehead down to her chin. More cracks spread across her body. For a terrible moment, Minho thought she was breaking apart, that he had destroyed the 1,000-year-old relic. But then he understood. "She's not breaking," he said in awe. "She's hatching." As they watched, pieces of the outer stone layer fell away, revealing a form underneath. It looked like a woman, but her skin had a blue tint and was covered with the same patterns they had seen on the statue, now glowing from within her body. The last of the stone fell away from her face. Her eyes opened, eyes that were solid silver with no pupils, like pools of liquid metal. She blinked, as if waking from a very long sleep. "Heiyun," Minho said softly, uncertain if she could understand him. The woman turned her head slowly toward him. When she spoke, her voice was like music, each word flowing into the next. "You have spoken my name," she said in perfect, if strangely accented, human language. "After 1,000 years, you have found me." By now, everyone from the camp had gathered around. They stood in a circle, too shocked to speak. The woman, Heiyun, looked at each of them, her silver eyes reflecting their faces. Are you Luminar?" Ju finally asked. Heiyun smiled, a beautiful but somehow sad expression. "I am the last of the Luminar. I was placed here to wait for those who could speak my name." She took a step forward, and the last pieces of stone fell from her body. She was tall, taller than any human, with long fingers and a graceful way of moving. Her clothes seemed made of the same material as her skin, flowing seamlessly into the patterns that covered her. "Why did you wait for us?" Minho asked. "What happened to your people?" Heiyun looked up at the sky, now bright with morning sun. "That is a long story, and one that will bring both joy and sorrow. But first, I must know more about you. You who could read our words and hear our music." She reached out and touched Minho's forehead gently. At once, his mind filled with images, stars and planets, strange cities, and people with silver eyes. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. He gasped and would have fallen if Ju hadn't caught him. "I'm sorry," Heiyun said, pulling her hand back. "I forget how new this is for you." My people shared thoughts with a touch. "I have been alone for so long. I am eager for connection." News of the statue's awakening spread quickly. Within hours, ships were on their way from Earth and other worlds. The quiet plains of Solara would soon be crowded with people wanting to see the last Luminar. That evening, as the 3 moons rose in the sky, Heiyun sat with Minho and Ju by their campfire. She looked up at the stars with a mixture of happiness and sadness. 1,000 years, she whispered. So much has changed. So much has been lost. But now, finally, I can fulfill my purpose. "What purpose is that?" Ju asked. Heiyun turned to them, her silver eyes reflecting the fire. "To remember, to teach, and to warn you about what is coming." 3 days after Heiyun woke from her stone sleep, the plains of Solara were filled with ships and people. Scientists, government officials, and reporters all wanted to meet the last Luminar. They set up a large camp around the spot where the statue had stood for 1,000 years. Heiyun found the crowds tiring. She was not used to so many minds and voices after her long silence. Each night, she would walk with Minho and Ju to a quiet hill far from the camp. There, under the 3 moons, she would tell them about her people. "The Luminar were not so different from humans," she said on the 3rd night. "We built cities. We studied the stars. We made music and art." "Why did your people disappear?" Ju asked. She had been wondering this since Heiyun first woke. Heiyun looked up at the night sky. "We didn't disappear. We chose to leave." She held out her hands, and the patterns on her skin began to glow. Above her palms, light formed into shapes. tiny stars and planets floating in the air. This was our home system, she said, pointing to a group of planets around a blue sun. We lived here for 10,000 years. We had 12 worlds full of life and beauty. The light changed, showing strange cities with tall, flowing buildings that looked like they were made of crystal and light. We had learned to use the power of thought to shape matter, Heyoon continued. Our cities grew from our dreams. Our ships moved between stars on waves of shared mind energy. You had no machines? Minho asked, amazed. We had them once, long ago. But we found a better way. Heyoon smiled. The patterns you see on my skin are not just decoration. They are living data, the collected knowledge of my people. The light above her hands darkened. The beautiful cities disappeared, replaced by images of a vast darkness moving between stars. Then it came, she said softly. We never learned its true name. We called it the void. It was not alive as we understand life. It was hunger, empty space that wanted to be filled. It fed on consciousness. The floating image showed the darkness touching a planet. The lights of the cities there flickered and went out. When the void touched a world, the minds of all living things were consumed, not killed, but emptied. Bodies remained, walking and breathing, but with no thoughts, no memories, no self. Juwoo shivered. That's horrible. It was. Heyoon agreed. We fought it for 100 years. We tried weapons, shields, hiding our worlds. Nothing worked. The void could sense thinking minds across vast distances. It was drawn to us because our thoughts were strong and deep. So what did you do? Minho asked. Heyoon waved her hand, and the images changed again. Now they showed thousands of ships leaving the 12 worlds, heading in different directions. We scattered. We hid our people among the stars. Small groups went to hundreds of different worlds, changing their forms to blend with the native life. They buried their memories deep, becoming new beings with new lives. You made yourselves forget. Juwoo was shocked. Your whole civilization just gave up. Not gave up, Heyoon corrected gently. Changed. Adapted. It was the only way to survive the void. It could not find what did not remember itself. But you remember, Minho pointed out. You didn't forget. Heyoon's face grew sad. I could not. I was chosen to remember for all of them. I carried the complete memory of our people, our history, our knowledge. I was hidden here, in this form that showed no mental activity, no thoughts for the void to detect. Why not just write it all down? Juwoo asked. Why did you have to sleep for 1,000 years? Because knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, Heyoon explained. My people did not want just anyone to find what we knew. The spiral was a test. Only a species that valued understanding over power would take the time to decode it properly, to speak my name with respect rather than command. Minho thought about this. But why wait for humans specifically? There are many intelligent species in the galaxy. Heyoon smiled and reached out to touch Minho's hand. Her skin was warm, and where she touched him, the patterns on her skin seemed to flow onto his for a moment. Because you are our children, she said simply. Both humans stared at her in shock. One group of Luminar came to Earth 100,000 years ago, Heyoon explained. They merged with the early humans, adding some of our genetic patterns to yours. They chose your species because you showed compassion and creativity, traits the Luminar valued highly. She pointed to the spiral patterns on her skin. The same patterns are hidden in your DNA, dormant but present. That is why Minho could speak my name when others could not. His mind carries echoes of Luminar thought patterns. Are there other statues? Juwoo asked. Other Luminar waiting to be awakened. Yes. Heyoon nodded. 12 guardians, one from each of our worlds. Each waits on a different planet, each with different knowledge. She looked up at the stars again, her silver eyes reflecting their light. But time is short now. The void is waking again. I can feel it stirring at the edges of the galaxy. The void is still out there. Minho felt a chill run down his spine. It never truly leaves, Heiyun said. It only sleeps when there is nothing to draw its attention. But now, with so many thinking species spreading across the stars, it has begun to hunger again. She stood up, her tall form outlined against the three moons. That is why I was left here. Not just to preserve our knowledge, but to warn those who would come after. The void will return, and this time, it will find many more minds to feed upon. What can we do? Ju asked, her voice small in the night. How do we fight something that eats consciousness itself? Heiyun looked down at them, her face gentle but serious. That is what I must teach you now. The Luminar found a way, but it requires something humans are only beginning to understand. The true power of connected minds. A month passed since Heiyun had awakened. The small camp on Solara had grown into a large base with buildings and labs. People from Earth and other worlds came every day to see the last Luminar. But not everyone had good intentions. We need to study her properly, said Director Jun, a tall man who ran the Galactic Science Council. He spoke to Minho and Juwu in a small meeting room. She should be moved to our main facility where we can monitor her patterns and run tests. Heiyun isn't a test subject, Minho said firmly. She's a person, the last of her kind. A kind that might save us all, Juwu added, but only if we listen to her, not lock her up. Director Jun frowned. This void she speaks of might not even be real. It could be a story to make us fear her power. Outside the window, they could see Heiyun sitting in the grass. She was teaching a small group of humans how to trace the spiral patterns with their fingers. As they followed her movements, small lights appeared above their hands. Look at what she's showing us, Minho said, pointing. The Luminar knew how to connect thought to energy. They could do things we've only dreamed of. Exactly why she should be studied by experts, Director Jun insisted. Later that evening, Minho told Heiyun about the director's plans. They sat on the hill where they often talked, away from the noise of the base. I was expecting this, Heiyun said calmly. It happens on every world when something new is found. Fear leads to a desire for control. We won't let them take you, Juwu promised. Heiyun smiled at her. Thank you, but it is not me I worry about. It is what might be lost if humans follow the wrong path. She stood up and looked at the stars. The void is moving faster than I expected. I can feel it, like a shadow passing over distant suns. How long do we have? Minho asked. 10 years, perhaps less, Heiyun answered. Enough time to prepare, but only if we start now. The next morning, Heiyun asked to speak to everyone at the base. Hundreds gathered in the open area where the statue had once stood. Director Jun stood to the side, watching with narrow eyes. People of Earth, Heiyun began, her voice carrying easily across the crowd. I have slept for 1,000 years, waiting for those who could speak my name. I was left here with a purpose, to pass on what the Luminar knew, to help you face what is coming. She raised her hands, and the patterns on her skin began to glow brightly. Above her, in the clear sky, images formed. Beautiful planets, strange beings, and finally the dark shadow of the void moving between stars. This is not just a story, she said as people gasped at the images. This is history, and it will soon be your future if you cannot learn what my people discovered. The images changed to show humans with glowing patterns on their skin, standing together in circles, their minds linked and powerful. Within your DNA sleep the patterns of my people, Heiyun continued. They can be awakened. You can learn to join your minds as the Luminar did, to create shields against the void. Director Jun stepped forward. And why should we believe this? You ask us to change ourselves based on stories and pretty lights in the sky. Heiyun looked at him calmly. I ask nothing. I offer. The choice is yours. She turned to the crowd again. I can teach those who wish to learn. But I cannot stay in one place. There are 11 other guardians waiting on distant worlds. They must be found before the void arrives. Each holds different knowledge, different parts of what you will need. That night, a small ship landed near the base. Armed guards came out, followed by more officials from Earth. They had orders to take Heyoon to a secure facility. But when they reached the base, they found 200 humans standing in a circle around her. Minho and Juwoo were at the front. "She is not property," Minho said, just as he had told Director June. "She is the last Luminar, and she has chosen to help us freely." "Step aside," ordered the lead guard. "This is a Galactic Council matter now." "No," said a voice from the back of the crowd. It was Director June. He walked slowly toward Heyoon. "I was wrong. I have seen what she can teach us." He rolled up his sleeve to show his arm. Faint blue patterns, like those on Heyoon's skin, were beginning to show there. "It doesn't hurt," he explained to the shocked guards. "It feels like remembering something you always knew but had forgotten." The guards lowered their weapons, confused by the director's change of heart. Heyoon stepped forward, her silver eyes shining in the moonlight. "The patterns are your birthright," she said. "Long ago, the Luminar shared their essence with your ancestors. Now, in your time of need, that gift awakens." Over the next weeks, many humans began to show the faint patterns on their skin. Heyoon taught them how to connect their minds, how to share thoughts without words. It was hard at first, but grew easier with practice. "We need to find the other guardians," Heyoon told Minho and Juwoo as they prepared a ship for their journey. "Each one knows different ways to fight the void. Together, they complete the knowledge." "How will we find them?" Juwoo asked. "The galaxy is vast." Heyoon smiled and touched the patterns now visible on Juwoo's hand. "You already know. The star maps are in your blood, sleeping until needed." On the day they were to leave, hundreds came to say goodbye. Many would go on their own journeys, searching for other guardians using the maps Heyoon had helped them find within themselves. "You won't be alone this time," Minho promised Heyoon as they boarded the ship. "The Luminar scattered, but humans will bring them together again." Heyoon looked back at the place where she had stood as a statue for 1,000 years. "My people believe that knowledge should be earned, not given," she said. "You earned the right to our legacy by speaking my name with understanding, not command." The ship rose into the sky, heading for distant stars where other stone guardians waited in silence for the right voice to speak their names. On planets throughout the galaxy, humans began to notice strange patterns appearing on ancient ruins, patterns that somehow seemed familiar, like words from a language they had always known but never spoken. The inheritance of the Luminar had begun.